Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday gardening question and answer video that I have been doing for a while now. The first Sunday of every month I do a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos. That'll be next weekend. The rest of the Sundays I'm doing question and answer videos as long as I'm getting questions. You can ask questions at the bottom of this video and I will try to pick the ones I think fit the group or help the group the most. I had pretty good questions this week, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump into them. Somebody asked me about my opinion about a mimosa tree. A mimosa tree, if you haven't been around the southeast, it was a really beautiful tree that has pink or even white flowers. It has a weeping, sort of spreading canopy, really beautiful foliage. Very, very attractive plant. It is an invasive, unfortunately, in the southeast United States, and I haven't covered it for that reason. Probably no big deal that somebody plants one at this point because they're everywhere anyway. The seed pods on them, the seeds are almost all viable and they just come up everywhere. I wouldn't have one in my yard because I feel like I'd be fighting the seedlings all the time, but they are beautiful trees. They're great for pollinators. They were asking about in Nashville, in Tennessee. It may not even be an invasive in Nashville. The seed may not come up there. I don't actually know, but from like eastern North Carolina and then down to Florida. Florida, that tree's a real problem. But there's nothing they can do about it. It's one of those things where people get kind of, it's an invasive. Well, it's kind of too late. It's already been out there anyway. There's nothing we can do about it. But I do love mimosa trees. They're probably pretty short-lived. I've never lived with one for any length of time, and so my guess is that a tree that grows that fast typically has a shorter lifespan. So keep that in mind. If you plan to be in the place that you're living in for a long time, that may not be a good choice anyway, because you may end up being the one that has to clean it up and cut it down. And then I got another question about Katsura tree, which is also interesting that these two questions were asked in the same week, because mimosa is an Asian native that has become an invasive, and for whatever reason Katsura trees, which are also very beautiful, they're not for flowering, but they leaf out with beautiful foliage in the spring. They have beautiful fall foliage. They have great shapes. Katsura trees are amongst my favorite trees. They're similar to redbuds, which I've covered pretty thoroughly. The leaf shape is they're heart-shaped leaves, but they're smaller leaves than redbuds. But they're amongst my favorite trees, and somehow they're not invasive, but they're also from Asia, which is kind of weird. But yes, I love Katsura trees, and if they're for your zone, I think Katsura is maybe zone 4 to 8. I think so. I'll correct it on the screen if I'm wrong about that. But I think at 4 to 8, you're pretty safe growing a Katsura tree. And again, that's just one of my favorites. That's a tree that's going to get in that 30-foot range, probably variety dependent, but a great shade tree. Somebody asked about privacy plants in Zone 6 in a shady space. And boy, we have really good choices in Zone 7 for that. Zone 6, most of your choices are kind of slow growing. The really good evergreen plants are going to be like rhododendrons and mountain laurels and yews. They're really good choices for shade screening where you are in Zone 6, but they're all going to be it's going to take some time, or you're going to have to spend a lot of money and get larger pieces. I would try Edward Goucher abelia. I planted some Edward Goucher abelia in a video last year. You can look that video up on my channel. Abelia works great in the sun or the shade. Doesn't really matter. And Edward Goucher is for Zone 6, and so I think it may be a good choice. And it'll be a faster growing option than the rhododendrons and mountain laurels and some of the common things you see growing in the shade in Zone 5 and 6. Really, somebody asked me about their blackberries and their blueberries dying off of kind of a piece at the time, and said they were keeping the mulch wet, and then that set off alarm bells for me. Blackberries, when you see blackberries growing in the wild, they're growing on ditch banks, typically. You can drive anywhere around eastern North Carolina, and you'll see blackberries growing in the ditches. They don't grow in the bottom of the ditch. They grow on the side of the ditch. And so if you plant blackberries in your yard, especially if you have poorly draining soil or compacted soil, and then you mulch it, and then you water it, that's an invitation to have root rot on blackberries. Same thing on blueberries. The blueberries that are grown in my state are all hilled up, meaning they create little hills for them and raise them above the other area. It's so weird because blueberries are actually native to peat bogs in New Jersey and up to up to Canada and kind of grow in wet spaces, but that peat acts differently than clay or some sort of clay, loamy mix. And if we plant blueberries flush to the ground or blackberries flush to the ground on flat space, and then put a heavy layer of mulch and treat them like some kind of shrub, other shrub that's in our yard, we will end up overwatering them. And the key, and the way to know that you're getting root rot on something like that is that one limb at the time dying. The roots under the ground are kind of connected to different branches on the top. So when I'm seeing one limb at the time die on something, I know that roots are dying underneath. Somehow or another, I'm losing a root at the time. I'm losing some main root. I would imagine in this case it's root rot. That can be voles, it could be some sort of other disease problem, but typically if you're losing one branch at the time, that's what it is. And so if you replant them, elevate them both, or find an area with a little bit of slope to put blackberries and blueberries on. Somebody asked me about planting some sort of dwarf shrub 10 feet from their foundation and 10 feet from a retaining wall, if the roots would bother the foundation at all. If you're planting something, I would say that if you're looking for plants that are going to stay like 15 feet or less, very few of those plants are going to hurt your foundation from 10 feet out. So there's a blue spruce or something was mentioned in that question. That would be totally fine. A Japanese maple would be good, a cultivar that stays smaller. Because you mentioned wanting a weeping tree, so Japanese maple that was grafted higher so that you could get some height out of it would be fine. But like I say, 10 feet out. The only the things that would hurt a foundation are going to be things like weeping willows and larger growing specimen trees. From 10 feet away, and even that is going to take years and probably decades, to hurt a foundation, or a sidewalk or anything. But anything that's like 15 feet or less, I can't think of anything that the roots would be so aggressive that they could actually hurt a foundation. I'm probably wrong about that, but the things you mentioned, no problem. Somebody had talked about their limelight hydrangeas repeatedly dying in the same spot, or a single spot that they kept losing a limelight hydrangea in. Limelight is a hydrangea paniculata. I've covered a bunch of them. I've covered limelight and little lime and white wedding. It's my favorite. You guys have seen several videos on white wedding on this channel because it's so compact and just really, really compact and covered in flowers. So I really like that variety. But the only thing that could be killing one in the same spot over and over and over again is water. Unfortunately, even if you think you're not overwatering it, that spot is obviously not draining for whatever reason, and pine bark soil conditioner would be your friend in that case, because that's what that plant's grown in. If you pull any of these plants out of a container, you're going to see pine bark in the East Coast, and in the West Coast you're going to find other types of barks. For same thing, same principle though. It's some sort of ground bark from the outside of a tree. Mixing that in to that space would be your friend. If you're seeing yellow, and this is something to teach from this, if you're seeing yellow on the interior of a plant, and you'll frequently see this on hydrangea paniculatas. My white weddings over there have yellow leaves on the inside of them right now, and the reason they have yellow leaves on the inside of them while they're in flower is because they're dry. And they're not dry in a way that I can even water them, because they're using so much water on those flowers that are on the top of them right now. They're just absolutely covered in flowers. So that they're having to shed some leaves in the bottom. I've talked about this with gardenias. Gardenias will frequently, I talked about it last week in gardenia question, about them being yellow on the interior, and they were dry at some point while they were trying to set the flower buds. That's the thing to look for if they're dry, and I don't mind that. That's the one thing I don't mind, because that's not a dying plant, that's just a stressed plant from a lack of water. If they're browning from the top down or one limb at the time kind of a thing, that's more of an indication of overwatering, or yellowing on the newest foliage on the very, very outside of the plant. That would be an indicator of overwatering. So that's the kind of thing to keep in mind. That yellowing on the outside of the plant is a nutrient deficiency of some type. That's because the roots are being damaged by water. It can't get nutrients up, and so that yellowing on the outside, some sort of nutrient deficiency. Yellowing on the inside is it's shedding some leaves to compensate for the fact that it doesn't have enough water to have all those leaves and the flowers at the same time. So look for that. Try to stress the plant where it's yellowing a little bit on the inside, And I would mix some pine bark soil conditioner into that space. I think it'll solve it. If you can find it at Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, or a local garden center probably would have it, even more likely. Somebody asked about Mahonia for the shade, and that's where Mahonia belongs. I've got I've got 4 different Mahonia varieties in my backyard, and I have a video, I think, it says something like I have four Mahonia varieties in my yard if you want to watch that video. But I'm going to do an update video on my soft caress and my Marvel Mahonia within the next week or 2. As I'm selling this house, I'm going through and doing some update videos on videos that I've done in the past. And my Marvel Mahonia and my soft touch Mahonia look beautiful in dappled light on the northeast corner of my house over here. Super, super easy plant. So I highly recommend Mahonia in the dappled shade, and soft caress is just beautiful. You'll see it in an upcoming video. So thanks for watching this video. Next Sunday will be Subscriber Sunday, and then I'll get back to these question and answer videos the Sunday after that. So ask any questions you have at the bottom of this one. Thanks for watching.